Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. The viewers, I'd like to continue with Sirat al-Mustaqim, my journey through Islam, and this time I'd like to focus on Dawah in Pakistan. After my mother died in 1991, and I mentioned also that my brother told me not to visit anymore, sort of thing. The reasons for going back to the UK were not quite as clear-cut as they had been. So what I decided to do now was to spend a bit more time in Pakistan on vacations. And I'd given examples before of how we travelled in Pakistan up to the north of Pakistan, etc., etc. And now, when I used to go to Pakistan, I'd met a friend. I mentioned in the story of the Azan that there was a Jamaat in the mosque, and 3 people actually came and spoke to me after Fajr, and I made friends with those, and I stayed with them. I stayed friendly with them, and I'm still friendly with them even now. I've met the man twice in Dubai, and he telephoned on the demise of my wife, so you know we're still in close contact, and they still send emails to him and talk about meeting him perhaps sometime soon, inshallah. But anyway, when I went to Pakistan, he would come and be with me, and we would go to the prayers together, and sometimes after the prayer he would stand up and say that I would give a little talk, and I'd give a little talk, and he was quite happy with that. And when we used to go for Jummah, he would say to me that he's got friends around, let's go and talk to them. So we would go and talk to them about various aspects of Islamic life in various parts of the world, for instance. And what came out of this, that there was a slightly different perspective on their normal way of looking at worldviews or even events in Pakistan, because I'd argue on some of those as well from time to time. And this meant that one was still doing Dawah in a way, because you were talking about it. And one was a very interesting situation, because my friend had been a mill owner, cloth mill of course, and the person who lived next to my wife's family's house, where we got married, he also was a mill owner, and he had invited my wife and myself to his house after we were married, so we knew him. And one day we went to this man's house, and it was in a particular part of the town that I hadn't been to before, and it turned out that it was this mill owner. So we were talking like old friends, and my friend said to me, "What's this?" He was the next door neighbour to my wife's family. "Oh," he said, and this was a real surprise to him. But you know, we were catching up on what had happened to him and what had happened to my wife's family, and then eventually we got in with the mill owner, with my friend as well. So all 3 of us joined in eventually. But for a while we were on our own, just having a conversation, and that was a surprise, because you know you don't expect these sort of things to happen really. But it was quite pleasant. And then he said to me, would I talk to the youth, because the youth he thought were a bit wayward in Pakistan at that time. He said, would I talk to them? He'd get them together, and he'd set up a microphone in the garden, and I could talk to them. So I did that, and had a few talks with some of them privately or individually afterwards. And one of his sons wanted to go to the States, and he was determined to go, so he said he would let him go, but he'd keep him on a tight rein. He wouldn't give him too much money, so he didn't have too much freedom, sort of thing. And that happened, and after 3 months the guy wanted to come back, so he was happy with that. And then he said to me, would I talk to people in his family, or family circle, who had married abroad, in other words, married foreigners? And I said yes. And we met in this particular person's house, and the lady sat one end of the room and I sat the other end of the room, and there were 3 people sitting more or less in the middle. And before we started, I tried to talk to them to find out who or what they were, and they turned out to be Canadians. And in general, well, one was the wife of the Bishop of Karachi, and the other 2 were the deputy and his wife. Okay, the Archbishop was out of Karachi at that time, and I was going to talk on a basic introduction to Islam for these people. But essentially what happened was that every time I said Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the last prophet, no he's not, and the Quran is the last message from God. No, he's not. Well, I mean, if you can't talk on the topic on your own terms, what's the point in talking on it, you know? Because basically I'm talking on their terms, and there's no point in that. Let them do the talking if they want to, and I'll interrupt them. But anyway, I couldn't say that, so I decided that I wouldn't talk on the basic concept of Islam. What I would talk on was comparative religion. So I did. And at some stage we were talking, and I said, but look, I said, you're Christians, you believe in Jesus as God and man, a divine sacrifice. And I said, but if he's both, and they also claim that he was killed, I said, did he die as God or did he die as man? And this deputy archbishop turned around and he said, he died as God. I said to him, that's blasphemy. Man can't kill God. Oh, no, he said, no, he didn't die as God. He died as man. I said, well, if he died as man, what was so great about him? And he only ministered for 3 years. What was so great about his life that the world had to wait centuries before he came? He said, well, he said, I don't know, he said, it's like this, he said, when he died, the God part continued and the man part died. And I said, but that's exactly the same for everyone. Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, has told us that the body and soul is like a horse with a rider. And at the barrier we call death, the body, the horse, dies, and the soul, the rider, continues the journey. He said, that's exactly the same for every one of us, and that's exactly what you're saying. So what's different? Where is the sacrifice? Where's the divine sacrifice? Because the divine part didn't die. And of course they didn't have an answer. Okay? But well, we carried on talking for a bit more, and then when we finished, the deputy archbishop turned around and he said to the people present, how many of you were educated in missionary schools in Pakistan? And all of them put their hand up. Now, this is actually significant because there was a guy who called himself an apostle for Arabia, and he was operating out of Bahrain. And he said in 1960 in Jerusalem, it's not necessary to teach the Muslims Christianity. We only have to make sure they don't learn their own religion. Okay? Now we're getting into the Christian schools in Pakistan, that they didn't actually teach Christianity, they just didn't teach Islam. Okay? And so the people didn't know Islam. And that's one of the backgrounds. So when they went abroad to study, they didn't have Islam as their values, and they didn't know that much about Islam. They married Western women in general and came back, and now there was no Islam. And what the Christians were doing was they were visiting these families in an area called Clifton in particular, where the husbands were working. They were coming in during the day and talking to the families, and the husbands weren't even aware of it. And in fact, it turned out that the wife of the host in whose house we were had invited these people, the Christian people, without her husband's knowledge even. So, you know, it was obvious that they wanted some defense against anyone talking to them about Islam. But in fact, it exposed a little bit more than what we thought had been happening. That all this was going on undercover, basically, that they were talking to the families privately without the husbands even knowing. So that was an eye-opener. And in fact, I wrote to Ahmadinejad about this, and he got my letter just as he got a letter from people talking about Christian missionaries actually trying to teach Christianity to the children in Peshawar from the war with Afghanistan. But they're opening schools there, or what they called schools, but they're actually teaching Christianity to those children at the same time. And he got both letters on the same day, and he told me afterwards that because he got them both on the same day, he said, this is a sign from Allah, I have to go to Pakistan. So he went to Pakistan, alhamdulillah. You know, you don't know what comes out of what you do. I only wrote a letter, but he was much more forceful than I was, and alhamdulillah, that was a good solution. So I'll end this part here, and inshallah we'll meet again after a short break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear viewers, continuing an episode on Sirat al-Mustaqim, the straight path. In this episode I'd like to continue actually with Daud in Pakistan, and most people from Pakistan are aware of Makki Masjid and Madani Masjid, and I used to go there and with a friend, and he was a Tablighi Jamaat person, and in those days there were probably up to about 12,000 people attending on a Thursday night or whatever. And I might listen to someone talking for a little while, but ultimately I tend to end up in the room at the front where the people who are doing dawah actually congregate. And there one day I was talking to someone who was a doctor, and he was telling me about a Jamaat that went to South America, and this emphasizes the difference between the way we try to spread Islam and the way the Christians try to spread Christianity. They got to Brazil, and they're getting up the plane, and they were in the airport, and they had their Jamaat together, and there was another big group of Christians near them, and one of the Christians was talking to my friend, and he said, "Who are you and where are you from and why are you here," sort of thing. And he explained that they were Muslims, they had come to talk about their way of life to local people for 4 months. And he said, "Who are you and why are you here?" And the person said, "Oh, we're Christians, we've come to talk about Christianity to the people and to live with them for the rest of our lives." So you see the difference between the approaches now. One is for 4 months and the other one is for life. But I'm not sure that one approach is actually better than the other, because it doesn't take you 4 months to evaluate a person and their values and see whether they're genuine or not normally anyway. So I mean, that can be done and things can happen. And in fact the community in South America is in fact growing, the Muslim community. Not very big, but it's growing gradually, alhamdulillah. But it does show the difference in approach. And if you remember for one of the earlier episodes, I spoke about the man who came to Saudi Arabia as a missionary and became Muslim and was still going to do tropical medicine and other topics and still go and talk about the religion, but this time the religion would be Islam. But how much planning they do and how much forethought goes into it compared to what we do as Muslims, or don't do as the case may be. So, I mean, it's an interesting comparison sometimes. How thoroughly are we prepared and how thoroughly are other people prepared? Continue on that type of topic, that we did a session on dawah at the Olympics a year or so ago when the Olympics were in London, and we had maybe 200 volunteers or more, and we gave them training, and they would actually hand out pamphlets and interact with the public, but that was nothing compared to the Christians who had brought in all sorts of groups of people and held like parties and also spent a lot of money on it compared to us who had tried to spend a minimum amount of money on it, more on materials than anything else. And not just our group, there was another group, Abdurrahim Green's group, Ayura. They actually were giving out packages as well to people. So, you know, there's quite a bit going on, but as was on a relatively small scale compared to the scale of the Christians. But of course they've got so much funding anyway that we don't have. But anyway, alhamdulillah, and our efforts were reasonably successful. People did come to Islam. Many people learnt more about Islam, and we were well received, and we had a good relationship with the police as well, alhamdulillah. So, you know, what more can you ask for, really? It's difficult enough to get a project like that moving and then up and running, and then actually trying to keep the people under control and getting feedback. The difficult part is to get the feedback as to what actually happened. I would have liked to know what was successful and what wasn't, because it would have been an opportunity to know what actually worked in terms of talking to people in Britain. We don't actually know that. nowadays, really. And it's overall saying it's an individual approach, but basically you want a type of standard approach to start with, and then as you find out more, then you need to know in which direction you want to go. And we don't even have a standard approach yet, so we've got a long way to go, really. But alhamdulillah, there's a little bit being done, maybe more eventually, inshallah. But it's, as I said, it's getting more difficult to talk about Islam in this country, certainly publicly, and we just do the best we can, basically. And alhamdulillah, it hasn't died yet, and inshallah it will never die, so in that sense it's optimistic. And if we are getting through to the youth, then the youth inshallah will get through to their kids, and Islam will be safeguarded in this country. But if not, then it will be wiped out. So if this current generation lose Islam, the next generation after them will have lost Islam. It'll be a hard way to come back. It'll be a long way to come back to getting Islam in the country, but I don't think it'll get that bad. I actually think that the youth will safeguard the Islam. We are getting educated youth coming back now from training, and they are beginning to put something into the Islamic communities in the country. And the old school, the people who are stubborn and know only one thing, that's gradually changing, fortunately. Because the way Islam came to the UK was not from scholars. It was in fact from seamen and from people who worked on the railways and had a British passport, and they could travel in the Commonwealth. So they weren't educated in Islam, most of them. And a lot of them have actually been in the villages, or even outside the villages and outposts working on the railways, and didn't actually have any interaction with Muslims in some case. And they came here, so what would they do? They realised they had to do something for Islam, so they tried to get mosques going, and they got the house-style mosques to start with. Now we've got purpose-built mosques, and we've had the madrasa-style teaching, and now we think that that's gradually being changed or evolving into something a little bit better, perhaps. And inshallah it will change with the times and become what's needed. And now we've got Islamic schools coming up, so we've got another way of building on things. But it's all very slow. It's all very itty-bitty, for want of a better description. But alhamdulillah, at least something is happening, and it is changing for the better. And inshallah it will get even better rather than getting worse. So back to Pakistan, I mentioned Daud, so perhaps I should say something about my contact with him. I think I said in one of the previous episodes that he came over to Saudi Arabia to give lectures, and I met him after one of these, and I met him in the hotel and talked to him. Well, in fact, I kept in touch with him after that, and when he came, when he had his stroke and he came to Saudi Arabia and was in the King Faisal Specialist Hospital, just using a voice synthesizer or blinking his eyelids in recognition, I did go to see him, and his son Yusuf was there, and of course his wife, and Yusuf recognized me, and he said that his father had recognized me by the way he blinked his eyes, so that was something. And we actually one time took him out of the ward and took him outside into the fresh air, and he appreciated that, or seemed to. And lots of people came over and asked who he was, and we told them, and they did a dua for him, which is quite nice, alhamdulillah. So, in that sense, it was the best that could be done for him, but he was unable really to move himself. He was paralysed from the neck down. So there was this problem. And then, of course, he went back to South Africa. But alhamdulillah, he was a mentor in some ways, and he was a person who blazed a trail for others to follow. Of course, Zakir Naik is probably the best follower of him at the moment, alhamdulillah, and now his son is coming along, so it looks like we've saved for another generation in terms of having someone to speak for us and who's not afraid to stand up and speak publicly. And not everyone appreciates everything that's done, of course, but inshallah it will benefit the Muslim Ummah, and perhaps more of us can be encouraged to stand up and speak. I'll finish with one little talk, if I may. I used to say to some of the boys in the mosque in Karachi, why don't you do dawah? Oh, we do dawah. Where do you do dawah? Oh, we go over the other side of Karachi. You go over the other side of Karachi. I said, what are you doing in this locality? He said, I walk along the road from where I'm living to the mosque, and there are many people sitting out saying Assalamu alaikum, and they're still sitting there when you walk by them. They don't come to the mosque. Why don't you start with these people? Oh no, we go over to the other side. So the next night they came to me and they said, sir, there's a man who sits outside across the mosque. Would you come and talk to him? I said, okay. So he went and we sat down and talked to him. He was very polite, very nice. And I said to him about, that apparently you don't pray and this sort of thing, but not quite as bluntly as that. They led into it. And he admitted that he didn't pray, and this was between him and Allah. Okay, fair enough. But then he said, but my actions don't affect anyone, so why are you discussing it with me? I said, but it's not that your actions don't affect anyone. He said, you may think they don't affect anyone. I said, but you see those young boys playing around your gate? He said, yes. I said, in a year or two, it'll be their time to go to the mosque for prayer. They'll be old enough to pray. I said, you know what they're going to say? You don't go. Why should we go? Oh, he said. Well, in that case, he said, I'll sit inside. Well, there's no real answer to that, I'm afraid. I don't know. So, people make their own minds up, and they'll have to answer for their actions at some stage, or you can just call attention to it and see if they're willing to make any effort or not. But inshallah, it would get better than that. But it is a reaction that, in some sense, I suppose, is half expected at least, but it's one that you never like to hear. And inshallah, we're going to get better responses next time. So let me stop there with this episode, and inshallah we'll meet again soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.